I watched the boy with interest as he toyed around with the symbols on the floor. He had cut the inside of his forearm and was smearing the blood on the kitchen tile to create the summoning sigil. I blew out a tired breath over my bifurcated tongue and blinked through the nictitating membrane of my eyes. It was going to be one of those nights. He was one of those people, the kind that just had to throw in a macabre touch to everything they did. Blood was uncalled for, and frankly cliched as well. If he had the means to, he would likely have tried to sacrifice a goat as well. However, looking over the apartment, it was clear from his squalid living conditions that he likely couldn't afford a goat. He likely had spent his earnings on the black wax candles that he had placed around the circle. I could see him, but he couldn't see me yet. That was the problem with making the sigil too early. It opened a conduit through which I could see into the mortal plane. You'd be surprised how many times someone accidentally created a demonic sigil while trying to make a haunted park attraction look scary or a hot topic edgy. My summoning sigil is a fairly simple design after all. In the state, I could only watch. He still needed to invoke my presence. Hopefully, he wouldn't try the summoning ritual in Latin. Tibi magnem inno mi namadum, signa stellarum nigrarum mi vocer ti aca manu. Shit. He was pacing back and forth, reading the words aloud as if trying to figure out the correct accents and inflections. Each attempt was somehow worse than the last. I tried my best to piece together the invocation and make sense of what he was trying to say, but it was jumbled like he had plugged the words into Google Translate. At around the 7th attempt at butchering an already dead language, I grew tired of waiting and decided to step through. It was better to get this over with now than spend my entire night in this dingy apartment. I spoke. Seriously, did you even bother to translate it? What you just said, is this in English? To you, the great not-to-be-named, signs of the black stars, I summon you Akamana. First off, I think you owe Lovecraft royalties for ripping off that line. Second, why would you call me one not-to-be-named, and then proceed to name me? What am I, Voldemort? Besides, if I knew you were going to butcher the language, why not just stick to invoking me with my sigil? He looked up from his phone where he had Googled the words with a deer-in-headlights expression. I tend to get this look a lot at first. Summoners always have this image in their mind of a muscular, red-skinned demon with hooked claws and a goat head. I'm none of those things. God was my creator as well. Why would we be made in the image of cutting claws, masticating mandibles, and grotesque sucking appendages? God had a pattern that he stuck with. Humans, demons, angels. We all look relatively the same. Yet we're so different. I clarified for him. Think of it like this. If God is your father, then Satan is your cousin. Why would we look completely different from you? So, you're like me? I made a wry face and shook my head. You didn't summon me here to chat, did ya? He spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. You're bound to me. You must do my bidding. I chuckled. Oh, that's not how it works. I stepped over the seal and brought myself closer to him. He stumbled back and toppled over a chair. He whimpered impotently. But I had a demon trap. You were supposed to be trapped there. That's the problem with writing in blood. One break in the pattern and it's all void. In this instance, It was those overpriced candles you likely picked up at Hot Topic which resulted in breaks around the outer circle. Please don't flay me and mutilate my corpse. What? Why would I? Never mind. Not even going to touch that one. What purpose would serve for me to kill you? Word of mouth gets around and suddenly summoning Akamana is akin to instant death? No, that's bad publicity. I'm here to make a deal. You summoned me here for that, right? He paused for a moment, deciding to bury the initial fear, and said, "What do you want in exchange? My soul?" I laughed. Oh, your soul? Sorry, but what the hell would I do with your soul? It's an insubstantial thing. It's about as valuable as your virginity. He winced. I had hit a sore topic. Your servitude and pledge are what really matter here. In exchange for my assistance, you will spread the word about me. There's power to be had in influence, and there is strength to be found in the servitude of others. He spoke, anger tinging his voice. And what if I back out of the deal? What are you gonna do? He was angry about the virginity comment. A virgin? Or possibly. You would regret it. I left it at that, knowing his imagination would fill in the blanks and paint tortures worse than anything I could even manage. Man always did have a knack for ingenuity. He blanched at the thought. I knew he'd be mine, and he would do exactly what I wanted. There was only the small matter of the deal and its components. He paused, as if weighing his words. He had an endless sea of choices before him, and the opportunity to select only one. Did he want power, wealth, knowledge? His hands clenched by his sides, his cuticles turned white as he spoke. His anger was palpable. I want you to torment someone for me. I listened patiently as he vented vitriol. Beth Gallagher, that bitch, I want her to suffer. I want her nights to be haunted. I want her to lie awake in her bed, wondering when it was in her life that everything went wrong for her. I want misfortune to dog her every step of the way until she's so beaten down that the thought of doing anything rolls in her stomach like curdled milk. He continued. His voice rose and turned bitter. I want you to turn her dreams, hopes, and aspirations into ashes in her mouth. I want her to suffer every indignity imaginable. I want you to rot her womb so her children are stillborn and every conception aborts in the wasteland that her body has become. I want... What did she do to you? His invective halted. What does it matter? Do I need a reason to hate someone? What a human thought. If God were so interested in what was going on down here, he'd weep. Are you going to do what I ask, or do I have to summon someone else? His attempt to force my hand would not go ignored or unpunished. I nodded my head and said, What you ask will be done. I will make Beth summon innumerable horrors. And truly, the things you humans do because of love never ceases to astound me. He grit his teeth so hard I thought they would shatter and chip in his mouth. I loved her. She didn't love me. You say loved her, but that's wrong. No one would do this to another person if they didn't still have feelings for them. Rejection and love, hand in hand, bred this. I stepped back into the ineffective demon trap, ready to be gone from this world. He said nothing, his mouth open like a gutted fish gasping out its last moments. I didn't need to stick around. I would carry out my end of the bargain and hex this woman. He would spread word about me and convince more to summon me. He would lie awake at night with the realization that he had done all of this to the woman he loved. the more knowledge there was about me, the greater my influence would grow. Another thrall to evangelize my existence. The entire ordeal left me drained. It wasn't the energy I had exerted from being summoned. Slipping into and out of the world was like stepping through a pool of water. Easy, with no resistance. I was a welcome guest here. I had other reasons for my exhaustion. Humans have a tendency to do that to me. They can do something like that to the person they love. And yet they call us demons. I watched as she shuffled her way into the church. The building was empty. Typically, a priest lived on the grounds, but he had decided to take a brief sabbatical. The only ones in the church were Beth, Gallagher, and I, which would make our encounter go so much smoother. She didn't know my name, but she was about to summon me. All people in trying times make supplications to me, whether they know it or not. Abraham called out to me when the time came to sacrifice his son, and I had shown him compassion. I am Zadkiel, the Angel of Mercy. Beth had fallen in hard times since the curse had laid upon her a few years back. One of her legs had been broken in a car accident years ago, and it had never healed right. She was covered in carbuncles that tore open and wet pus at the slightest movement, which stung like salt poured into a wound. Her musculature had been degenerated by wasting diseases. She had been living on a friend's couch for the past month, but they were about to kick her out and she knew it. She had nowhere else to go, and as people always do in these situations, she turned to faith. Her faith was nothing spectacular. Like many, she had lost it in her youth. She had become disenchanted with the world, and it soon spread and contaminated her faith. It didn't take long before it rotted to the core. She knelt in the first row and made the sign of the cross. I silently touched down a few rows behind her. She hadn't become aware of my presence yet. I heard the words, though she wasn't speaking them aloud. Even if they weren't actually audible, to me they came out like a desperate scream. I need help. I don't know how it got so bad or what I've done to deserve this, but I can't take it anymore. My friends are gone, I'm about to be homeless, and every moment of my life is spent in fear and agony. I'm at my limit. I don't even know if you even exist, but if you do, why? Why are you doing this to me? I need your help. I can help you. Beth whirled about in the direction my voice was coming from. I slowly began to materialize in front of her. If I were too sudden in my appearance, I would startle her and maybe even send her running from the church. I had once looked resplendent like one of the heavenly host, but my time amongst the living had begun to take its toll on me. My skin was beginning to turn gray and mottled. Feathers had begun to fall off of my wings, revealing the pale, almost translucent flesh beneath. My veins rose out of my skin like tiny, blue, wriggling worms. Beth gasped in shock, and I reassured her. Fear not, child of man. One cannot exist in both heaven and earth without being altered. They are two different worlds with two different environments. You wouldn't be able to live in heaven with your corporeal form, and my time spent on earth has taken its toll on me. What you see before you is a product of the time I have spent here helping people. That explanation seemed to put her at ease. She spoke slowly, as if uncertain of the question itself. Are you an angel? I unfurled my wings, carefully, so as not to lose any more of my feathers, and answered, Yes, daughter of clay. I am a son of fire born from God's hand just as he has shaped you. I have come here to answer your call for salvation.
How?
You have cried out to me amidst your suffering, and I have heard your supplications.
Why is all of this happening?
A shadow hangs over you, tainting all of your endeavors and poisoning your plans. This shadow was set upon you by a spurned man to break you down and make you suffer. You rejected him, and in his scorn, he called forth an infernal entity to visit tragedy upon tragedy on you. She sat down as if the revelation was too much for her. She wept into her rough and calloused hands. A sore on the corner of her mouth dribbled out a viscous, straw-colored fluid that mingled with her tears. I stood in the aisle, waiting for her to regain her composure. It took her a few moments before she wiped the snot and tears away and asked,
"What is going to happen to him?"
She meant the one who had put the curse on her in the first place. I took a second to decide whether or not to tell her the truth. Nothing. The heavenly mandate prevents us from taking justice into our own hands. He is in the employ of a demon. When his end comes, he will burn for his actions, but until then he will not be punished. He will continue his life unaffected and without any repercussions, I answered truthfully. Her face soured for a second. With the lesions, weeping sores, and angry countenance, I thought I was in the presence of a demon rather than a human. There's very little separating angels from humans, and there is even less between demons and them. It didn't take any special insight into the human condition to see the gears in her head turning. She was thinking of revenge. Maybe hunting down the man who placed the curse on her and getting retribution. She was too weak to do that, though. Another possibility about what she may do descended on me like a bolt from the blue. A pact. Beth would summon a demon and pledge herself to them for her justice. I couldn't let that happen. We were already losing far too many people to the temptation of ease and instant gratification. I'd have to do something. I would have to talk her out of it some way. She grew tired of my contemplation and broke my train of thought. Her teeth ground into a snarl and she howled.
"That's not fair. Why should I be the one to suffer when he did this all to me? Where's the justice in that? What kind of God?"
What right do we have to meet justice based on our own volitions? What do we know of God's plans? Are we wiser than him? If we dealt out retribution for every offense, the world would be nothing but cinders. She became quiet for a moment before she asked weakly,
"If you can't punish him for what he's done to me, can you free me from the demon's curse and return me to the way I once was?"
Her exertion had left her drained and made her look pitiful. She was in her 30s, but Akabana's influence on her had left her looking like a withered crone. Her skin hung loosely off of her. She was wasting away before my very eyes, and there was nothing I could do. Well, that wasn't the truth exactly. No. Once someone has been cursed, it is irreversible. You will carry this affliction until the day you die. Misfortune will dog you until the very end of your life. You will wake up every morning in trepidation of the terrors waiting for you, and you will go to bed wondering what horrors the next day will bring. Your last breath will be pure agony, a cruel coup de grace that culminates from your curse. She exploded to her feet and limped towards me. Anger had clouded her mind and blasted all rational thoughts out of her head. She wanted to rage. She wanted to blame someone for the way the cards had been dealt to her. She snarled.
"Then what good are you? You can't save me, and you can't punish the son of a bitch that did this to me. What can you do?"
I can give you mercy." My wings folded outward suddenly and encircled her. She tried to back away, but was enclosed and pressed against my almost transparent flesh. She couldn't scream while I held her close and forced the air out of her lungs. She tried to strike me, but her wasting disease had rendered her weak. I barely felt her punches and struggling as I pinioned her to my body. The hand I had used to stay Abraham's dagger slid the same blade into her. It entered right below her rib and angled up into her heart. She tried to scream in surprise, but it came out as a sigh. I wrenched the handle upwards and raked the blade through the tough muscle that was her heart. She expired as I watched the life leave her eyes. I laid her against the pews. A tiny trickle of blood crept from the wound and stained the oak. I stood over her corpse and offered a prayer up for her. Her suffering was finally over. I had freed her from the demon's blight. There was no other way. This world was a cruel place. People suffered excruciating agonies, and the only balm that we had left to offer them was a quick death. I had done God's work. I had saved another poor soul. I smiled at the prospect of carrying out the Lord's will. Beth was gone. Her suffering was over. I stretched out my wings and watched as more feathers sloughed off. I had made my choice. This place was taking its toll on me, but I couldn't leave others to suffer. I flapped my wings and took to the air. I could hear more prayers echoing around me as others pled for salvation. There were more I could save, and I intended to save as many as I could. They all needed my mercy. I knew her complete story the moment I laid eyes on her. Once every couple of years, the heavenly host would send one of the entrants my way. Typically, these people were having difficulties adjusting or they had burning questions that they needed answered. They claimed that this was done to keep me attuned to the people. You make one inquiry about the current state of slavery, and suddenly people view you as antiquated, insensitive, and racist. In reality, they did it as a means of painting a sympathetic face on the omnipotent. She moved carefully into the premium mobile. She was a shaking autumn leaf in a windstorm. They had sent her to me to provide some sort of comfort, a solace of sorts. I would answer any questions she had, or smooth over any difficulties in transition. Looking at her, I could see who she was, and what she actually was. She appeared as what she had wanted to be seen as. She looked to be about 9. She had blonde, sun-kissed hair that flowed down her back. She was a little on the heavier side. Scrapes and bruises marked up her elbows and knees that told of her life as a tomboy. Those were just appearances, however, a facade. I saw through the illusion to what she was at her very core. That wasn't who she was. She didn't have long hair. They had cut it and shaved it down in the end. They said it was to save her the trauma of seeing it fall out. But in actuality, it was to save them the heartache of seeing her deteriorate before their eyes. She wasn't heavy. In fact, she was bone thin. Months of radiation and chemo tend to do that to people. It robbed them of their appetite. The food that they could keep down was typically bland, light, and not very nutritional. Her scrapes and bruises were replaced with bed sores and lesions. She looked around from torch to torch, expecting me to be standing by the flames and warming myself. She expected to see me as a kindly old man, but I was not. Technically, I wasn't in the room. I was the room. I was there. I was everywhere. My form was incorporeal and was spread out every inch of the chamber. I am insubstantial. I am everything. She spoke.
Is anyone here?
I am. A little bit of biblical humor. It passed over her head completely. She continued.
They sent me to you. They said you had the answers.
I did, in a sense. I could make anything truth. I could speak words, and my words would become reality. I was the truth. The real trick was making my answer palatable to them. Acceptable. I responded. Speak, my child. I only have time to answer 3 of your questions. The girl paused for a moment, as if considering running out of the room. Talking to thin air was a daunting prospect. She eventually decided the risk of looking foolish was worth the reward. Her voice quavered with her first question.
Why do bad things happen to good people?
I paused for a moment to consider my response. I had multiple answers, but only one that would sate her curiosity and ease her discomfort. To test their faith and to keep people strong. Without tribulation and trial, people grow complacent. They deteriorate in their faith. Trees without wind lose their branches. My mind traveled back to an image of her. She was in the hospital bed with her toys laid out before her. She had dolls, she had action figures, cards and trinkets from faraway places. Some were gifts from her family and friends. Others were offered to her from nurses and doctors returning from distant locales that sought to give her complacence. They gave her so much, but none of it was what she actually wanted, what she needed. She was angry and a bit jealous. They had given her all of these wonderful things, but had taunted her in other aspects. Sure, she had all of these amazing toys, but didn't have anyone to play with. The hospital ward was empty. Some would call that a miracle, while others would denounce it as a tragedy. There were no kids to play with. She secretly longed to be outside and feel the sun on her skin and the wind in her hair. She wanted the company of another child, someone to confide in. But that was denied to her. She spent her final moments in loneliness. She interrupted me from my reverie after taking sufficient time to ponder my response and said,
Why do we have to die?
To give life meaning. If you all lived forever, life would have no meaning. There would be no sense of urgency. The smallest of notions and the grandest of gestures would be rendered pointless if death had no significance. People die, so humanity tries to live to the best of their abilities. I trailed off to her hair. It was once blonde, but the nurses shaved it down before radiation therapy. They called it a kindness. They didn't want her to suffer the cruelty and emotional trauma of watching it come off in patches, to be left as wisps and ghosts of what it once was. They buzzed it off, and a few of the more compassionate nurses joined her. They got their hair razored off alongside her and donated it to the Locks of Love organization. At the end, she looked like a tiny, bald, emaciated alien. She hated losing her golden locks. She wanted to keep them to the very end. She didn't care if she had to watch her hair fall away in clumps. She hated the fatalism of it. She hated the thought that they would shave her down due to the thought that she wasn't strong enough to watch it all fall apart. The worst thing was that one nurse had saved a lock of her hair and bound it into a tiny little doll. The nurse had given it to her as if having a part of what was once her would be a comfort. It was not. It was a reminder. It reminisced of days lost, of moments she couldn't return to. It was a memento mori to her. It was her final question. She could ask me anything. The secret of the universe was in her hands.
Why do bad things happen at all? I understand that our faith needs to be tested at times, but why? Why do we need to suffer to this degree? What point was there in suffering the way that I did? Answer me, please.
Her voice quavered, and tears began forming in the corners of her eyes. The images overtook me. Her family had stuck with her through the diagnosis, the chemotherapy, and physical degradation. But they weren't there at the conclusion. In the end, she died alone. She died reaching out into the nothingness. A part of her accepted that they didn't want to be there at the end, to witness her final agony. She tried to understand that, but in the end, when death came, those thoughts and reasoning were blasted from her mind. The last words on her lips were her mother and father's names. Her father was in an alleyway when the time came. He had just finished work and stopped at a bar on the way home. He wanted to be somewhere where people didn't know his story, didn't feel sorry for him. He had a few drinks and chatted with a hooker at the bar. At the very end of his daughter's life, he wasn't there. He was cheating on his wife. They eventually retreated to an alley where he gave her $100. She tucked it into her bra and leaned her back against the brick wall. He did what he was there to do. But it didn't matter. It didn't help. But he did find another sort of catharsis. He whimpered into her ear as she stroked his hair in sympathy. He hadn't cried since his daughter's diagnosis, and at the end, this was his only outlet. He was sobbing against her with his pants around his ankles. When his daughter died, her mother was at home when the leukemia took her daughter. She had finished a bottle of wine to fortify her for what she wanted to do. She knew she had to make it quick. Her husband would be home soon, and if she didn't want him to intervene, she'd have to do it now. The tragedy had chipped away at her, and at the end of her daughter's life, she felt like a sand-blasted ruin with nothing left. She was a smooth statue, a symbol of sorrow. As her daughter died, she was on the cusp of taking her own life. She had downed a bottle of red wine and had just pressed a razor into her wrist. She held it vertically, knowing that this was the way to do it. She pressed it so deep into herself that blood had welled up at the surface. All she had to do was drag it up her arm and slice herself open. She had had enough. She was empty. She was a heart-shaped box that had been hollowed out. She closed her eyes in preparation to do it. But in that moment, all she could see were her daughter's eyes. Her hand trembled. Her daughter's angelic face smiled at her through the darkness. She remembered holding her daughter at the hospital, and that moment gave her the strength to let go. The razor dropped into the sink and her mother broke down. She wept at her weakness while her daughter died, alone and scared, miles away. I was lost in the recollection. The girl waited a few moments before repeating.
Why do bad things happen at all? Why do we need to suffer? You have to know. You made us to suffer.
I paused. There were multiple ways I could answer her question. but there was only one true answer. She was on the brink of tears. A moment of light, a moment of clarity gave me the courage to give her the truth. I answered her. To give my life meaning. You all suffer to keep me going. To keep me interested. I sent her away before she could question my answer. In the end, I gave her the truth. I was God. I was a supreme being watching the world like a soap opera. I was a kid examining an ant mound with a magnifying glass, smiling as I incinerated those unlucky few. They suffered, so I could live through them vicariously. Their pain made me feel alive.